Good morning. This is K24's New Dawn. My name is Joel Chacha, and this morning we focus on the grim economic outlook. In studio, I'm joined by Honorable James Gakuya, who is the chair of the Trade Committee in the National Assembly, Honorable Nabi Nabwera, who is a member of the Public Accounts Committee, also Lugari Member of Parliament, and as well Dr. Maina Kamau, who is an economist. The Court of Appeal has declared the Finance Act 2023 unconstitutional. What does this mean? We now have to revert back perhaps to the Finance Act of 2022, which was enacted during the former president's tenure. Let's now rope in Ruth Kinyanjui, who's an economist. Good morning, Ruth. What are the implications of now not having the Finance Bill of 2024, which the president refused to sign, and what he banked on, during his maiden budget, Finance Act of 2023, now being declared unconstitutional? Are we in a financial crisis as a country?
Good morning, Chacha, and thank you for the opportunity. A very peculiar times we are living in Kenyan economy this time. But we must appreciate a few things that really happened in Finance Bill 2023. One of the main controversial issue, of course, we cannot forget, was the housing levy. And a lot of court cases were brought into book, but I think all of them were ignored. Looking at the Finance Bill 2024 and the issues that cropped around it, of course, I look at that like it might have really influenced the Court of Appeal in terms of nullifying the Finance Act 2023. What does that mean for not only you and me, but also for the government? First, going back to the Finance Act of 2024 is going to really backdate a lot of issues that we are going through. Secondly, it means that whatever President Ruto wanted to implement in his tenure, that is also not going to be happening. But Chacha, don't forget that people have already paid taxes as per last year, as per the Finance Bill 2023, and people still were banking into that. Then what does that mean for businesses in Kenya? Does it mean that they are going to go back to KRA and ask for their money? Of course, that might not happen, but we are going to see a lot of implementation issues that are going to come with KRA in terms of how to deal with individuals. Because if you can see, one of the recommendations that was being put is that for businesses to go to their lawyers and just find the way forward in terms of what needs to be done in terms of the taxes that had been filed. But from a government regulation, I look at it like it's going to be more of a refund issue, or maybe, of course, the physical money are not going to be refunded. But from an economic perspective, Chacha, it means for the next 3 years, or for the next 3 years, that President Ruto is going to be before his re-election, then he's not going to be able to change or do a lot of changes, especially from a fiscal perspective. What does that mean from an economic perspective? Chacha, I can tell you that economies don't grow for in a short time, or in a short span of time. For an economic perspective to be evaluated, a long period of time, say between 5 to 10 years, has to be evaluated. Do I see like the last 2 years are going to affect Kenya from a long in a very deep way, or in a very much way? Maybe not. I don't see that affecting Kenya for much, because in a lot, because comparing to the neighboring country, of course, Kenya does better than most of the neighboring countries. And I know Kenyans are still law-abiding citizens. From a difference from a Finance Bill 2022 to 2023, there were no lot of changes, actually, apart from a few, and the major one being the housing levy. Then that is not going to affect the country in as much. And the difference that was going to be felt was in the Finance Bill 2024, which has been actually been thrown out at this point in time. So from an economic perspective, the president still has an opportunity to still rely on even on Finance Bill 2022 and make good some of the issues that are affecting the Finance Bill 2023, but also bring a proper foundation in the next 3 years, especially now that now he has formed a new cabinet and he's looking forward into an economic turnaround. What does that mean for common businesses like for MSMEs or any other kind of businesses? Is still an opportunity. Actually, whenever a country or the economies of the world are going through an economic turmoil or economic turnaround, there are still a lot of opportunities to make good some of the best, to make good and also find opportunities.
We'll be getting to Ruth shortly. She's still with us. And now to Dr. Maina Kamau. Are we facing a very grim economic outlook compared to how we had initially, viewed it with the budget 2024-2025 already in place?
Yes, I would say we are facing a very grim economic outlook. And I want to start by saying, if you want to go far, go with the people. But if you want to go fast, go alone. And unfortunately, if you go alone, you may not go far. And that's what the President Ruto is trying to go by going alone. I want to say that the reason why you need to go with the people, for instance, when Kibaki joined power in 2003, the tax revenue collected was 250 billion. It took him 10 years to go to 1 trillion. Then it took Uhuru Kenyatta regime to move from 1 trillion to 2 trillion, 10 years. And with President Ruto, he came and he said, within 1 year, I will move from 2 trillion to 3 trillion. And which is highly impossible. And that's why we are seeing all his tax laws have been dropped. And we have gone back to what we were working with Uhuru Kenyatta in 2022, because that's the last finance bill that was passed. Now that 2023 has been dropped and 2024 has been dropped. What that means is that we find ourselves in a very, very, very bad situation, because the finance bill for 2023 sought to raise an additional revenue of 211 billion. The one for 2024 sought to raise an additional revenue of 346 billion. So in total, we are talking about 600 billion that the government is losing. So what that means is we will now resort to borrowing more. And we cannot borrow more externally. We have to borrow more locally. As you understand, Chacha, recently, when the Finance Bill 2024 was dropped, the
Moody's rating.
The Moody's rating actually downgraded the Kenyan economy and said the Kenyan Eurobond
so basically we are regarded as a high risk.
Yes. Yeah, high risk. And actually the Kenyan financial assets, the Eurobonds, are now being treated as junk investments. And junk investment, what that means is that they command high return because they are very high risk. So we are likely to see a situation whereby the government will borrow more. Locally, I wanted to insist on the issue of locally, because when it comes to the issue of IMF, like right now, in the month of July that has just ended, we were expecting to get a funding of $1 billion USD from IMF, which has not come through yet, because IMF were banking on the fact that the president would be able to pass the Finance Bill 2024 and give them the promise or the comfort that the government will be able to repay the loan, which they have not been able to pass.
Let's also get a key voice. That is a member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee in the National Assembly, Honorable Dr. Babu Owino. Good morning. Since President William Ruto took over office, he brought forward the two finance bills, that is 2023 and 2024. Withdrawing the 2024 one was due to public pressure. However, the 2023 one, he did sign it and it was in effect. President William Ruto with a budget close to 4 trillion. Is he in a crisis? We'll be getting back to Dr. Babu shortly. And now to Honorable James Gakuya. Actually, or rather to Honorable Nabina Bera, sorry. President William Ruto seemed ambitious on moving from 14% to around 22% revenue to revenue ratio to the GDP, but already is facing setbacks. Do you feel for the head of state that he has to run such a country with a budget but no revenue?
Thank you, Chacha. I think we were here with Kakuya about just when we were about to do the finance bill. And you remember I argued, and I still want to argue, that the quality of decisions is dependent upon the people who process those decisions, including the advisory council you get. And I put up a case, which I still put up today, that the president, either he ignores serious professional advice, or the people he has picked on to advise him have no quality and they do not understand the economy in which we are operating in. And I've said before, even during that time of the 2023, I'm vindicated. I'm really vindicated. On the floor of the House, I made 3 contributions. One, that many of the things we were dealing with were unconstitutional. And 2, I said, if you ignore public participation, which is a constitutional provision, then we are going to headwinds. And thirdly, that there are basics of economics, and even on which I want to put here. I use a cow. I said, you are only able to milk a cow if you feed it properly and give it water. Milk is nothing but water. A cow will take in as much water depending on how much feeding, including the dry matter. The economy is the same. If you want to get more money in terms of revenue, do the intricacies that is required, the basics, please, please. And I said, Kibaki gave us 3 basics about country if you want to expand its economic portfolio. The first one is that win the trust of the people, because they are the producers. Win the trust of the farmer, win the trust of the entrepreneur, win the trust of the industrialist, win the trust of international investors. At that point, everybody wants to contribute towards economic survival and economic growth. The second thing I said Kibaki taught us on helping running an economy is that please have quality manpower and let those people run. Give them responsibility, give them power, but make sure they are accountable. The third thing Kibaki taught us on how to expand the economy is that do the small things that matter.
Well, small things that matter. Now, let's get a very key voice in this conversation. A member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee in the National Assembly. Good morning, Dr. Babu Owino. Usually when we find ourselves in such crises, we have an option of either slashing the budget or borrowing more. What should President William Ruto do?
It's simple, Chacha. Number one, we saw that the courts declared a finance bill unconstitutional on the grounds that, number one, there was no sufficient public participation, and that, number two, that we are experiencing a poly-crisis, an economic poly-crisis, where we cannot pass regressive taxes. That's unfair, that's vexatious, that's frivolous, and that violates the spirit of the Constitution. And number three, among other reasons, that there were matters touching on the Senate on the county on the counties, and therefore the Senate ought to have participated sufficiently in the passage of that bill, among other reasons. That clearly showed you that we were passing irregular laws which were very unprocedural, and because of that, it was declared unconstitutional. We as a nation, we are suffering because of these high taxes, and it is good the courts are listening to us. And therefore, back to what you asked, that should we borrow more or should we scrap off the budget? We cannot run a nation without a budget, but we cannot run a nation also with a bloated budget. We need a budget that is going to cater for development, not recurrent expenditure. A budget that will not favor patrimonialism, where we are budgeting for corruption. We are budgeting for certain individuals' offices, which are unconstitutional. Borrowing, on the other hand, is not wrong. This was opined by a great economist, Italian-American economist called Franco Modigliani. And he stated clearly, he came up with the theories of consumption. And one of them is called the life cycle hypothesis. And he stated clearly that we can enjoy what we ought to have enjoyed in 70 years to come. We can enjoy it now. We can borrow money to enjoy it now, as long as we pay it on quantum merit basis, pole, as we reach there. That clearly shows you that borrowing is not wrong. That was the origin of the loan system and the mortgages. So what do we borrow for? If we borrow for corruption, it is wrong. If we borrow for patrimonialism, for favorism, it is wrong. If we borrow for recurrent expenditure, it is wrong. Those types of debts are called unproductive debts. But if we borrow for development, is okay. Domestic borrowing is very much welcomed. Why? Because money circulates in the system. It's only that the government has also made it difficult, through Ruto, has made it difficult for us to borrow domestically by increasing the central bank rates to a high 13%. What does it mean if we increase central bank rates? It means that we are discouraging borrowing, and two things will happen. Number one, the investors will shy away from investing. Therefore, there will be no local production because of high borrowing. Number two, there will be increased values in goods and services that we produce in a nation. When the value of the goods and services increases, there will be high cost of living. There will be low demand, and therefore the demand will shift to imported goods. On the other hand, if we invest so much on imported goods, then we will be promoting what we call the foreign absorption instead of promoting domestic absorption. Foreign absorption means that so much money will be lost. There'll be leakages in foreign countries. Money that we get, we will be spending it out of our country. Therefore, if we borrow, let us borrow to develop. But as we speak, our debt ceiling is too high, almost on a 50-50%, both in domestic and foreign. Yes, Judge, back to you.
Member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee of the National Assembly. Now to Honorable.
Just something I had not finished.
I'll be getting back to you. Honorable Gakuya.
One is that,
do we need to borrow or to cut down the budget?
I'm just heading there. As we speak, the situation that we are in economically is that the experts are saying that at every 10 shillings that we collect, 7 shillings goes to pay debt, and therefore remaining with only 3 shillings. Do you expect that, in fact, once we encourage that appetite of borrowing, we will cure anything? It means we are going to close now the bar very soon. What do we do? Or where do we rely on after we close the bar? And then it means 10 out of 10, we will be going to pay debt. How do the country survive? The only option is to reduce our needs so that we can cope with what little we are collecting. And that's the way to go. The development, yes, we know it's going to be harshly affected, but we have no choice. But we cannot encourage this country to borrow more. Borrowing more, who will come to pay? That's my position. That we need to redeem ourselves. We must know what is urgent that we must not cut. And then we deal with that. But we cannot say our appetite is keep borrowing. We keep borrowing and we reach the threshold. It tells you after maybe 1 or 2 years, then you will not be able to pay salaries for teachers, salaries for our military, and then the country will be in crisis. How do you survive?
Dr. Kamau, borrow or slash the budget?
Wow, a very hard question, because both of them, once borrowing is, we are already highly indebted. As Mheshimiwa Gakuyu has said, 7 out of every 10 shillings is going to repay the debt. And actually, I keep saying it is not the principal debt, it is only the interest. So we usually borrow to pay another debt.
That's an idea. In the current financial year, the budget is basing 1 whole trillion to pay interest rates. 1 whole
without even
trillion.
touching on the principle.
Without touching the principle. Where do you want to take the country?
Dr. Kamau.
Yes, on the issue of cutting the budget, you remember the first BPS, budget policy statement that was issued by Treasury and was taken to the Parliament. It had proposed a budget of 4.2 trillion. But the National Assembly was able to trim it to 3.9 trillion. So basically, the budget had already been trimmed. And that's why when the Finance Bill 2024 failed, and the government was required to trim further, what we saw being trimmed the most is actually the development budget. Because after the failure of Finance Bill, Finance Bill 2024, which was meant to mobilize 346 billion, the government went back to the drawing board and said out of this 346 billion, we will be able to cut expenditure by 169 billion. And this 177 billion that we had thought, because if you say 346 minus 169 billion, we are left with 177 billion. So 177 billion is now how the budget was supposed to be reduced by 177 billion. By 346 billion, 169 billion was to reduce the budget, and the 177 we were supposed to borrow more locally. So basically, we are seeing ourselves borrowing more locally, which, as Honorable Babu has said, already the CBR rate is at 13% for Kenya. For Uganda, it is at 7%. For Tanzania, it is at 10%. What does that mean? That you can easily borrow money from Tanzania, from Uganda at 6%, or maybe because that is their CBR rate at 6%, probably the banks are issuing at 10%, and come invest in government treasury bonds at 18%.
Well, Honorable Nabi, while the government, after withdrawal of the Finance Bill 2024, it was to slash the budget. However, rather than cutting on the recurrent expenditure, development budget was targeted more. And also, social sectors were critically affected, including the education. In a situation that we are now, what should we do? Borrow, cut, and when we cut, where are we cutting?
Chacha, my argument has been this, and which I hold very dearly. In a house, if you want to make a meal, and you intended to have a meal that includes chicken as stew, and just before you prepare that chicken, mwewe came and took it away, what do? Will you go hungry? No, you will look for sukuma and prepare a meal. Where we are today is basic. You know, I've heard people say there will be a crisis. There can never be, for God's sake. Finance Act 2023 was an amendment of Finance Act 2223. We go back to Finance Act 2223. What was in this Finance Act 23 that was very critical was basically that housing. It was the major issue here. And some little taxes here and there. 16% VAT. Just go back to 2022 and 2023.
So does it mean...
Then you stop this housing madness which people don't want. By the way, this housing thing, even today, Even today, people don't want.
Honorable Namida Wera,
Nothing has
because
changed.
the 1.5% housing levy was under the Affordable Housing Bill, which is now an act. On 8% VAT on fuel, which is now under the Finance Act of 2022. Beginning today, should we have that?
We go back.
The fuel prices reduced.
Please, we
immediately.
Go back there. That's what it means. I mean, we are a constitutional order. If there is no Supreme Court order to vacate the pronouncement of the Court of Appeal, these pronouncements of Kinaichungwa in the National Assembly don't hold water.
Well,
in fact, those are misleading. They are misleading to the debate at hand.
Well,
and just a minute, I wanted to say this. It is true that we make mistakes. Anybody can make a mistake. But it is also true that you must trace back where you made the mistake for you to get to a corrective measure. Now, if I were the one advising, and I'll be speaking to John Mbadi this morning, and be telling John Mbadi, as you get to National Treasury, one of the things you should guard against is loftiness. Principles that work elsewhere but cannot be domesticated in this country. And I'll be telling him, please look at recurrent and not development. And I'll be telling him, if these principles, some of the areas that we have been struggling, and he will tell you, up to today, in this new funding model in the educational sector, maybe we need to go back to what was working.
Well, Honorable Namina Bwera, at that juncture, we take a short commercial break. When we come back, I'll be playing a clip of the majority leader reacting to, the court ruling, and as well bringing on board the LSK president, Faith Odhiambo. We take a short commercial break. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned.
What made you walk my way? Was it my smile or my diamond rolling? You ain't seen nobody else in the place till you heard me say, Comment ça va? Comment ça va? Comment ça va? Comment ça va? Aïe ça va, 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 comment ça va? How are you? Unjan? ¿Cómo va? Habari gani? Ni hao. Assalamu alaikum. ¿Cómo estás, amigo? Namaste. ¿Cómo ça va? ¿Cómo ça va? ¿Cómo ça va? ¿Cómo ça va? Aya ça va, aya ça va, aya ça va. Aya ça va, aya ça va, comment ça va?
Your Saturday morning won't be the same again.
Launch sequence activated.
Have a nice trip.
Oh yes! As K24 TV brings you Akili and me. Ubongo Kids, Next Generation, My World Kitchen, Model Earth, and MI High on Kids Zone from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m.
mapateme ya bolingo natie maboko na moto
natili bolingo ata elali selio miso ekoki olelisa kaka miswango lisusu naleli nga Barbara
nayemba na lombo makiari Franco ayemisaka nga makambo ezali minene olukaka makambo lokole gomelio supporte ozuwaki bangagement lokole gomelio assume molambi ya fufu atalaka mai na fufu ya poussière tekizima yozali nteba.
Have you watched K24? We would love to hear from you. Send us your feedback on what you like and what you don't like and why. You can use any platform to reach us. We can be reached on Facebook, SMS, Twitter, and WhatsApp.
Welcome back. I'm glad you're still watching K24's New Dawn. My name is Joel Chacha. And now to Ruth Kinyanjui, an economist. Ruth, you know, the conversation now is on whether we should borrow or cut down on our budget. But as well, if at all we are to borrow, more domestically or externally, which way is safe?
What has made us get here? First, the thing that has made us get here, Chacha, is poor planning. The fact that there was a disconnection between what was being planned and how the economy is really doing. I think that is the biggest disconnection. From a collection perspective, there's something called constant, and that can be held from 2022 to now, because economic changes don't take a short time. Then, with the new current CS of Treasury, then they need to go to the back to the drawing board and find out what really the problem was, even before we come back to say that we are going to borrow or even collect more locally. Can we be able to sustain ourselves as a country from where we are, or from the basis of Finance Bill 2022? And those are the best questions that are going to be asked, because as it has been said earlier, already some constitutional issues were ignored. For example, public participation. Where was it done? And how was it done? Did it give the right feedback? So there's a big disconnection between the technocrats that are really formulating and putting down the finance bill, and also the reality on the ground. And Chacha, if that is not reconciled, then we are going to come here and really struggle with what needs to be done and what needs to be collected, what needs to be paid, and we are still going to go with the same through the same problem. So I think from this perspective, we need to go back to the foundation of the problem before we decide whether to borrow more or not. But we need also to live within our means. I know one thing, that the economy of Kenya is resilient, and with proper planning, if everything goes back to proper planning, then we are going to be at a better place going forward.
Well, we still have Ruth on board. Shortly after the appellate court ruling, the majority leader, that is Kimani Ichung'wah, reacted to the ruling, and this is what Ichung'wah said.
Because Parliament is the law-making body in the country. If the judiciary desires to be the lawmakers, they have the option of resigning from the judicial seats and come and run for parliamentary seats and come make laws in this house. But we cannot have a situation where the judiciary now wants to make laws from the bench. It has never happened anywhere in the world, in any democracy, Honorable Speaker. I saw last week in the United States, President Joe Biden outgoing in the United States, having similar problems with their Supreme Court. This era, Honorable Speaker, of judicial activism and judicial dictatorship must and needs to come to an end, Honorable Speaker. Because the judiciary is telling us that the legislative arm of government cannot legislate now. The executive arm of government will never execute anything without being superimposed on what to do by the judiciary. Honorable Speaker, I just say that in passing because we have gone through a third reading. We have made amendments to the Appropriations Act. I'm here wondering whether...
That's Majority Leader Kimani Ichung'wah reacting to the ruling by the Court of Appeal, which declared unconstitutional the Finance Act of 2023. Let's now rope in Faith Odhiambo, the Law Society of Kenya president. Good morning, Faith. You've heard what the Majority Leader has said. He has actually termed the judgment as a case of judicial activism and judicial dictatorship. What are your comments on Ichung'wah's remarks?
I would say that he could not be more wrong with regards to the same. The courts are actually doing what they are supposed to do, interpreting the law, and they have done so. And they must obey court orders as well. The three arms of government are independent. The High Court had initially said the 18 changes made to the Finance Act 2020, and now the Finance Act followed the proper process on public participation, irrespective of the fact that the public was not involved in public participation of the 18 changes that were made to the Finance Act 2023. I'm citing a previous case with regards why they agreed with that assertion. However, the Court of Appeal has brought meaning to public participation and saying that case was different and differentiated the previous case, talking about why the new ideas did not go through proper public participation because they had neither been reviewed by the public nor earlier legislative readings. These were totally new and therefore broke public participation in legislative process. And this is the kind of accountability that people have been crying and asking, that Parliament cannot say that they are as representatives of the people. It amounts to public participation, and that had been their argument. What the courts are just doing is breathing life into the Constitution. What the Constitution provides, they are able to interpret the Constitution and the law as is supposed to be. In fact, I would dare say that Kimani Ichung'wah should check himself, because what they were purporting to do is they were purporting to interpret the law according to what they felt was right. So the courts have actually done what they're supposed to do, and it's not judicial dictatorship. The judiciary is just doing their work as they're supposed to do, independently and breathing life into the Constitution. And I hope the previous Appropriations Act followed through the correct processes, because they could be up for review as well with regards to some of the decisions based on this 2023 Finance Act. The decisions that have been made by the Court of Appeal in terms of even the process of how Appropriations Act what process they should go through. We will be looking at the same.
Timelines we should be looking at in terms of now the finance, or going back to the Finance Act of 2022 take, for instance, fuel prices are supposed to be now imposed 8% VAT and not 16%. So how soon should we have that in place?
Well, I think once this law, unless they appeal and seek a stay, particularly at the Supreme Court, then those should revert, because we have instances that we're even seeing the transactions on online transactions that had been taxed. There are several questions on that. What's going forward? I find particularly agreed to in with the eTIMS. That has been an issue that we are looking at as well, because of the data privacy violations of the eTIMS system, particularly in the medical side. now that that mandatory requirement is no longer there, our aim is we hope once these orders are served on the various institutions, it should be implemented, particularly now that you cannot get a refund because the courts have said that was not specifically pleaded. And so the only aim would be for citizens to save themselves and ensure that these are implemented immediately, because the court has pronounced itself on several sections that have since affected the current Finance Act 2023.
Of Kenya President, Honorable James Gakuya. You know, you've heard, first of all, what the Majority Leader Kimani Ichung'wah has said, that this is judicial activism and we must stop it. You know, the word must, does it mean now that there will be probably budget cuts, the judiciary will be targeted more as a punishment, perhaps?
What I would like to state is one very categorical, that we must avoid arrogance. And as we respond, we must understand that we have three arms of government and each has to respect each other. And decisions made by a judiciary, we cannot come to demonize them and trying to implicate that they are taking as a particular direction to punish the government, because judges has done their work. And let me tell you, any particular judge cannot make any verdict if there is no complainant. There has to be a complainant. So there have been people or groups who took this matter to court. And it tells you there were people who were Kenyans who were dissatisfied with a certain process. And therefore, they made the challenge of the same. And the court has no choice but to determine at the end of the day. Do not expect that the court must say, let us respect our arms of government. And this way, we respect the executive, they have their mandate. We respect the register, they have their mandate. And we must also know, interpretation of law is not based on legislature. It is enacted and under the judiciary. And the judiciary is doing its job. And as of now, I would say, as much we want to blame the financial bill of 2024, and also the outcome of this 2023-2024. I'd also want to say this. Our economy has not doing well. And this is the correct position. And can we assess ourselves at the close of the financial year, how many projects did we commence in terms of development which has achieved what it required? You had county aggregation centers, you put 4.5 billion, you are only able to release from the exchequer 1 billion. 3.5 billion has gone to drain. You had what we call cherry fund. You budgeted 4 billion to cherry fund. You are only able to disperse 500 million. 3.5 has gone to drain. You have budgeted money for flagship projects in the six counties. Out of 5 billion, you are only able to disperse 300 million. How do you want to say that actually the cost of living or the cost of the economy is being challenged by finance bill? It tells you between the treasury and the KRIA, there's a problem, maybe of a targeting or maybe of a projecting that the treasury and the money revenue collector, they should go back to the drawing board. Therefore, at any targets they have on any projection, they should be at least proper and within the margin lines. Otherwise, such a description tells you in one purview like trade, it is heading to die. And we are going to find what we call white projects, whether we like it or not, with this crisis.
Dr. Kamau, when President William Ruto refused to sign the finance bill of 2024, in an interview with journalists, he said, you know, we're going to borrow 1 trillion. That appeared to actually sort of punish the Gen Zs because it's them who will pay these loans in the future. And now with the tone of the majority leader that we must stop this judicial activism. Does it then mean when it comes to revenue or rather budget cuts, judiciary will be targeted more despite it being the arm of the government that receives the lowest funding?
That's true, Chacha. And actually, let me support the sentiments echoed by Honorable Gakuya that it is the utmost arrogance for the majority leader in parliament to actually say that the determination, the outcome of that case that was read yesterday, that is almost null and void, because you cannot be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. As you have said, the judiciary is the one that is given the least budget out of the three arms of the government. The budget that we read, the judiciary is given 23 billion. The parliament, the legislative arm of the government, given 44 billion. And the executive, 2.6 trillion. And actually, the National Assembly the other day, they increased the funding of the CDF from 63 billion to 68 billion, when actually we were supposed to be reducing to be doing budget cuts. And we saw the National Assembly actually increasing their budget by 5 billion. So we are likely to see, as Ishungu has said, now that the National Assembly are the ones who have the power to really allocate the use of revenue collected by the national government, we are likely to see the judiciary probably being targeted in terms of funding, which would be very unfortunate, because for the rule of law to really take effect as it should, then judiciary should be properly funded. And actually, maybe going forward, what I would recommend is that we ring-fence the budget of the judiciary, that it should always be given maybe a certain percentage of the total budget. If it is, we are talking about 5 trillion, can they be given 1%? If you go to 10 trillion, can it be 1%? If it is, so that it remains independent. For an organization to be independent, then it must have the ability not to be influenced in terms of reducing or increasing the budget that is given to them. Unlike what I'm seeing in the National Assembly, whenever the executive wants them to pass a law, they give them some carrots. Like now, the CDF has been increased from 63 to 68 billion, and it's because the executive understands that they are the ones to really pass these laws.
Honorable Nabina Bwera, you know, a majority leader in parliament has powers. And with such a ruling, is judiciary now at the mercies of parliament yet again, especially with the budget cuts, that it could be targeted more? You know, President William Ruto said the other day that with the withdrawal of the Finance Bill 2024, then county governments and the national government should get, you know, an equal hit. And there was a reduction from 400.1 billion Kenya shillings to 380 billion shillings. This time round, do we now expect, rather than the national and county government, it will now be the arms of the government and judiciary to suffer more?
Chacha, I think you're still also living in the past. Post-Gen Z revolution, expect a completely different parliament. Because we have moved, you saw the thing, the upstream, this upspring was here in Nairobi. But in the last few weeks, it has been in the counties. What that means, it is not about one system, it is about individual accountability. It's unfortunate, and I'm certainly sure, Gakuya here comes from Kenya Kwanza, that position by majority leader is personal. It does not reflect the position of the House. Please note, and I started by saying we are a constitutional order. As a country, we chose a constitutional democracy. Democracy built on institutions, democracy built on freedoms, democracy built on respect for the law. And I can assure you, I will be one of those who is telling a majority leader that is out of order. You know, when you are hit by this kind of thing, there are two things you do. One, you have to move to the upper court if you think you have a case. Secondly, please do a retrospection. Every time there is this kind of thing, go back to your drawing board and ask yourself, where do we go wrong? I mean, I will tell you a story. We were in Busia, and the president was there. And Omtata, last year, Omtata told the President, correct these mistakes. If not, we will meet in court. Because they are wrong. Time has vindicated. We were on the floor of the House. We battled these things. We said, when people have said we don't like this, please listen to them. Please, we say, the committee that went out, can you please implement? Don't choose on a probability. Once the majority have said, move this class from here to here, please move it. Don't go by the minority and say, because the minority has power, this minority which has power will retain the glass here. So we need to go back to the drawing board. In this mongrel of it's called what? Broad-based. We hope we will get some light in terms of quality advice, in terms of speaking to the president, not what he wants to hear, but what is just, what is right, what is professional, what is forward-looking.
Well, John, allow me to rope in. Oh, first of all, we take a short commercial break. Remember, today we are extending this program, and as soon as the cabinet vetting will commence at the Parliament buildings, we'll be crossing over live. We take a short commercial break. When we come back, I'll be roping in Ruth Kinyanjui, an economist. We'll be focusing on the liquidity that we will experience in the country. Will it be a problem, or will there be, cash flow in our systems? Remember, there were about 650 billion pending bills that had not been budgeted for. And so, what is the fate of that? And as well, on the supplementary budget that is still on the floor of the House. We take a short commercial break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.